Hi, everyone. I'm jumping in with a little announcement first. We are going to be hiking the Great Glen Way in Scotland in just a few weeks' time from this being published. So, the Great Glen Way is a trail a little bit north of the more famous West Highland Way. So, we're doing something a little bit new this time. We're going to be very heavy on social media, and we want you to follow us along. So, the best way to follow us is to follow us on Instagram at the Long Ways Podcast and on Substack on the Long Ways, that's substack.com. Either of these are a great way to follow us, to support us, and we're going to try to bring you a lot of great moments from the trail on a daily basis while we're hiking it. With that, we'll get back to the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Long Ways Podcast. I'm Devin Windlespect, and I'm joined today by a really great guest and friend of mine. We met in Boston a few years ago, and ever since then, she's been traveling around the world, hiking different pilgrimages around the world. And so we thought to bring her onto the podcast to hear a little bit more about her perspective and her experiences hiking, and to talk about, her first pilgrimage that she did, the Camino de Santiago in Spain, that kind of set her on this path. So Sadie Yates is the person who's joining us today. Sadie, welcome to the Long Ways Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And I guess just start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and I guess why you decided to hike the Camino, which is 4 or 5 years ago now?
It was, it feels like forever ago. It was 2022, so 3 years ago. I feel like, so I grew up in a family that did a lot of hiking growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Central Virginia near Shenandoah National Park. Right now I live in New York City, so I'm a grad student there in the theology, religious studies field. But hiking and traveling have just always been a really big part of my life. And a way that I've really connected with other people, like connecting with, my parents, my siblings. But then as I've become an adult, like traveling with friends or living with host families or just meeting people in different parts of the world that I've gotten to keep in touch with. I actually don't remember the first time that I learned about the Camino de Santiago in Spain, which if you're unfamiliar with it, it is a network of trails that goes through Spain, but also France, Portugal. There's a route from England. It goes into other countries too. And all of these routes converge in Santiago de Compostela, where James, who was one of the apostles of Jesus, is supposedly buried. So for 12, going on 1,300 years, people have been walking this. I think that I probably learned about it first in high school Spanish class, maybe.
Okay.
I honestly have no idea. I just feel like I've always known what it is. But then because I've been in sort of the religious studies theology world for a little while, I've had a lot of friends or colleagues who have walked portions of it, usually just for themselves, but sometimes even taking students on a trip or teaching a class about it and then taking a group. So for years, this is kind of a pipe dream of mine. One day, when I'm not a student and I have more money, or when the time is perfect, maybe I'll go and I'll do this thing. But it was kind of like a far off dream. And then the summer that I walked it, I had time off between finishing a master's and starting my PhD. And I was going to be moving cities, moving from Boston, where we met, to New York, where I live now. And it was kind of a big life transition moment for me. And so I just decided, what the heck, why not? I have the time, I'm healthy. Maybe it's not the quote unquote perfect time, but it's the time that I have. Let's just go do it. So I went, and a couple of my friends from my master's, we went and were just tourists in Spain for about a week, celebrating the fact that we survived COVID grad school. And then they flew back to the States, and I took a train and a bus to the start of the trail. Yeah, so it was my first solo, like big solo trip, actually. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, how I decided to do it. Like just a pipe dream, and I finally had the
Yeah, I
time.
mean, tell
So
us a little bit more about the trail though. So, like in perspective, the ones that we usually hike here in the long ways, we usually take about 10 days, maybe a little bit less depending on the hike, which is usually ends up being around like 80 to 100 miles, depending on the hike. The Camino is a lot longer than that. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about the actual trail itself. What does it look like?
yeah, absolutely. Um, so one of the things I love about the Camino is it's just so customizable. What I mean by that is because there are so many different routes that end up converging, you can, as a hiker on it, you can have a huge variety of experiences. So the route that I did is called the French route. Uh, so I started at what is nowadays kind of the common starting point for people who do the quote unquote whole thing. It's right across the border in France. And that route is about 500 miles to Santiago de Compostela. I
Yeah.
tacked on a little bit extra because I walked past Santiago de Compostela to the western coast of Spain because I just really wanted to say that I walked across the whole country.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
you know, that's like just even now, like saying that, it's making me smile. Um, so I did about 550 miles, and the whole thing was, it was 37 days of walking for me. With rest days, it was about 41. So I had about 4 rest days sprinkled in there. Um, but the trail itself, because it's so long, there's just a huge variety within it. So the very first day of it, you cross from France into Spain over the Pyrenees using the route that Napoleon used to cross into Spain.
Wow.
So day one is a killer, like 15 and a half miles over the Pyrenees right off the
Hmm.
bat. I was really, really sore after that day, as I'm sure you can relate to from your stuff.
Yes, for sure.
Um,
15
yeah,
miles is a hard amount to start with. That's for sure.
it is. And there is a place about 8 miles into that day that you can stop at, maybe a little less actually. Um, but most people just want to like get over the mountain and kind of
Hmm.
like just like do that. So, right, you start off with this like huge kind of like mountain ascent and descent. And then you're going through these like lovely little towns for a few days. One of the interesting things about the Camino is some of the places you go through are really, really rural. And then some of the places are these huge like urban cities.
Hmm.
So, you know, it's it's a really fun experience to go from walking through these towns that are like one or two streets of little local businesses that essentially are only still surviving and open because of pilgrims walking through.
Yeah.
To go from that to walking through like Burgos or Leon or Pamplona or these big cities. And the Camino has trail markers. There are little seashells and arrows that mark the trail. And so when you're out on these like rural, in like it's called the meseta, like the high grasslands of Spain, it's very easy. You're on one usually dirt or gravel road. There's just like, maybe wheat or other crops growing around you. It's very picturesque. It's very flat. Um, it's easy to not get lost. So
Yeah.
to go from that to these big cities where it almost becomes a scavenger hunt, like you're looking, around corners for like an arrow that's, spray painted on a wall or on a little
Hmm.
sign tucked back somewhere. Um, so I loved that, just the way that it combined like those very different environments. And the landscape also varies a lot. So like I said, you got the Pyrenees the first day. It's pretty green for a while. But in the middle, as I mentioned, there's this portion on the Meseta, this grassy high plain that's about 2 weeks. that part I found it to be pretty brutal.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of shade. It's very dry. It's very hot. I think that's the part of the Camino where your body has sort of started to adjust to the physicality of it, and it becomes way more of a mental thing of, how do I keep myself motivated just to keep doing this?
It reminds me, in Portugal, we hiked like a similar kind of area on the Rota Vicentina, which is just, again, like scrub, grass, hot sun. And so that got a lot out of us in like 3 days. I can't even imagine 2 weeks of that.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I started, I thought that portion was only a few days, and then I found out it was going to be 2 weeks. So
Oh no.
that's okay. Luckily I'm a pretty adaptable person. But yeah, it really is just, that mental thing of, okay, like, what am I going to think about to keep myself going? Or who am I going to chat with or walk with today that will be, a motivating conversation partner, or where I can like learn something or connect with someone new. That part was tough, honestly. But then after you get through the Meseta part, you enter Galicia, or, the Spanish accent, Galicia, which I loved. It's just lush, green, mountainous, reminded me of where I grew up a bit. It's just lovely. That was probably my favorite part of the trail. Then you get to Santiago de Compostela. And then, like I said, I walked past that to the coast. The year I was there was very fun because any year that the Feast of St. James falls on a Sunday, Santiago de Compostela has a holy year. And I was arriving there. This was unplanned, by the way. I mean, this was just the universe looking out for me, I guess. I arrived to Santiago de Compostela, I think the day before the feast day. So I was there on the big day. And there were, music stages set up throughout the city. There were concerts going on. There were fireworks. Something that a lot of the pilgrims who walk it do, whether or not they're Catholic, is a lot of people will go to the pilgrim mass in the Basilica in Santiago. And they have this huge incense burner that swings from the ceiling. It takes literally I think it was maybe 7 men to wield it and to get it going. And then one guy stops it at the end, with his whole body, this thing is swinging, and he reaches up and uses his whole body to kind of grab it and spin and stop it. And so that was going, it was just amazing.
Yeah, so a few questions here. One of them is that I remember talking to you about the trail, and when we do our hikes, we meet people on the trail and we form relationships, but a lot of the times it's just the three of us hiking. But the Camino, it's a really communal thing. You want to talk a little bit more just about that aspect of it?
Yeah, for sure. This was an aspect of it I really loved. And this, I will say, the communal aspect of it depends a bit on which route you choose. So some hikers who want a more solo experience, or who just want a less crowded trail, will do routes like the Northern Camino route, which is a little less busy. I'm actually working at a hostel there this summer, so I'm really excited to check that one out. Or the Camino Primitivo is one that is much less crowded. So there are ways, if you want that. For me, like I said, this was my first big solo trip. I was really excited to travel by myself, but I was also, really hoping to connect with other people as a solo traveler. And what ended up happening was there was this really cool dynamic. Someone who I met at the beginning of the trail, who had walked it before, described it to me as, you sort of develop a little Camino village as you go through the trail. And so, there might be people who you see every single day, or sometimes groups will even coordinate staying at the same hostels as each other or things. I wanted a little more flexibility and didn't want to become part of any group that was really kind of insular. Um, so, it took me a little bit to kind of like settle into kind of, a Camino group or a Camino family. But yeah, you end up developing this village of people where, you're walking together, you're seeing them day after day. You know everything that they're struggling with. They know what you're struggling with. People are checking in with you about how is the blister on your pinky toe doing? Like, there's just a lot of care. There's a lot of generosity in the community there, I think. But then one of my favorite things was because it is so long, sometimes you'll lose touch with someone and not see them, not talk to them. Maybe you didn't exchange WhatsApp info, but you'll like hear about them from other pilgrims. They'll say like, "Oh, did you meet like that Irish guy, with X, Y, and Z backstory?" And you'll get updates from other people. And then there were also times where, I would hear kind of updates through the trail about friends I had made. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, I would run into them and we would get to reconnect. And it's amazing how much it felt like this really big, joyful reunion. Maybe you only walked with someone for a day or two, but when you see them 3 weeks later, you know that they have lived a lot of life since then. They know that you have lived a lot of life since then. And so it would just be like the most joyful thing, going out for meals in the evening with people at your hostel that you've reconnected with. It was just beautiful.
You also like you brought this up a little bit at the beginning of the podcast, but you have kind of like an interesting perspective hiking these, which is that you do have like a theologian background. And so like we'll kind of maybe talk about a little bit about this later, but like this kind of set in motion, like doing a lot of like other pilgrimages around the world. I know like the people who were doing the hike, some of them were Catholic, some of them were doing it as a pilgrimage, some of them were doing it more in a way that like my dad and I do it, which is like a little bit more of just like a personal journey. But can you talk a little bit about like the actual pilgrimage aspect of it and what that was like?
Sure. Yeah. So I think this was really interesting because there is a very large variety of people there. I would say most people I encountered who were walking the Camino, various routes, would refer to themselves as pilgrims. Even those who were identified as being part of religions that were not Catholicism, even those who were non-religious but were spiritually curious, or even like non-religious and non-spiritual walkers. So that pilgrim term like gets really broadened and kind of just thrown around on the Camino almost as a catch-all. Something that was really interesting is the Camino itself, for a lot of people, holds this kind of like power, or I almost want to use the word magic to it. There are little idioms and catchphrases that get thrown around. One of the big ones is the Camino provides. So, an example of when someone would use that, like someone is having really bad blisters and they left behind their bag of bandages and moleskin at their hostel. This happens to me, by the way. Right. And so you're like out there, you're struggling, you don't have your supplies. But I mean, people will just say this, oh, the Camino provides, and maybe halfway through the day, someone walks by and like gives you what you need. And so the Camino itself almost holds this like, this just like symbolic but very real power for a lot of people of a broad variety of backgrounds. So for me, I grew up Catholic, had been like studying mostly Christian theology for several years before I went. And so having that background, I think I was really curious about that aspect of it. So some ways that showed up for me were along the way, in addition to stopping at cafes and museums and cultural sites, there are a lot of churches or religious sites that you can visit as you go. And one of the fun things, too, is you get a little pamphlet when you start that you collect stamps along the route of every hostel that you go to and of every kind of site that you visit. So a lot of the churches will have stamps. So even people who, aren't interested in the religious aspect of it, like might want the stamp and go collect it. But yeah, for me, it was this sense of like being in these places that humans for centuries have found to be sacred. And for me, that was one of the most powerful parts of the whole thing. Like, okay, someone 1,000 years ago walked this same route. Their footsteps are literally like underneath me, under the layers of the earth. Uh, what were they going through? Like, what was their motivation? It for me, it was just this really big journey of connection. And so part of that was like a sort of new or different type of way of connecting to faith and religion and spirituality. But also like connecting really deeply with myself. I did a lot of introspecting. I did a lot of reflection, when you're just walking some days just totally by yourself, like there's a lot of time for that. But also for me, it really was connecting with like just the history and like, man, this place and these sites have just meant so much for so many people. And for me, like the word I would use for that is sacred. Like just to think about how many stories and burdens and emotions that land holds and those sites hold, it's just incredible. I mean, it's really just incredible.
Well, like I was saying, that you kind of took this, and when I first knew that you were going to do this, it seemed like it was going to be a one-off, but it kind of set in motion like a series of hiking different pilgrimages around the world. Do you want to go like a little bit more into like how this kind of launched that and where you went next?
Yes. This as my friend, you know that this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So similar to you, I also thought this experience would be a one-off for me. Um, However, I walked the Camino, absolutely loved it, developed just like this amazing sense of self. I felt like it gave me a lot personally. Like I just developed a really solid sense of self in just ways that were just deeper than what I had experienced before. So it did a lot for me personally. But like I mentioned earlier, I walked it the summer between finishing a master's, starting a doctorate. Uh, so that first semester that, I went back, I moved to New York, I started the PhD program. That first semester, I just kept thinking about the Camino. And I found myself bringing like questions from it to my classes, or, I would write a paper and realize, oh my gosh, this has the Camino's fingerprints all over it. So, in conversation with some faculty mentors, they really encouraged me like, hey, you seem to love pilgrimages. This could just be your thing if you want. Like, you have to write a dissertation, this could be what you write about. And so this for me just opened up this world of possibilities. So what I have gotten to do, my kind of annual rhythm is I am in New York, during the academic year, like September to May. And then every summer I have gotten to go and do like 1 to 2 different hikes or pilgrimage trails. I feel immensely grateful that these count as work trips for me. Like, what the heck? And that was by design.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the summer after the Camino, I walked a pilgrimage route in Mexico with this group of 16,000 women who every summer walk from their home state of Querétaro. They walk south down to this big basilica in Mexico City dedicated to this image of Mary called the Virgin of Guadalupe. That was a completely different experience from the Camino. So for someone like me who's kind of like, go with the flow, make game time decisions, like be spontaneous, the Camino provided a lot of space for that. This Mexican one was like, we've got 16,000 people to move. And, one day behind us was the men's group. So there were like many more thousands of them. And so it was just very different. Like, okay, we're all getting up at this time. We're all resting at this time during our break on the side of the highway. We're all eating at this time. It was much more structured, and much more like explicitly religious, I would say. So that was 2023. 2024, I did an amazing trip to Japan. Yeah, so I was presenting at a pilgrimage studies conference in Kyoto and decided, well, if I'm going to be here anyway, I'm totally going to walk a trail. Of course, as one does. And so I walked this trail called the Kumano Kodo, which actually has a partnership. They have this, it's called the Dual Pilgrim Program, them and the Camino de Santiago. That trail was amazing. It's a Buddhist Shinto trail that has existed for thousands of years. It's much shorter than the Camino, so that one I completed in like 10 days, and that included non-walking days. But you're in these like huge mountains on this peninsula. I stayed in a Buddhist monastery for a couple nights, which was incredible. Yes, they cook, their like vegetarian food for guests. I joined their morning prayer service bright and early at 6 a.m. That was a struggle for a non-morning person like me. But it was incredible. Just, the hospitality to be welcomed into like cultures and faith traditions and linguistic settings that are just totally different from your own. To be able to receive that kind of hospitality, I mean, I'm sure that you felt this too on your travels. It's amazing. Yeah, so that trail like was just incredible because it was just so different from anything I had done before. And I was staying in a lot of like small little guest houses with the local hosts. There was a lot of connection with the local population. It did rain a lot, so that was a struggle, but that can happen anywhere. And then that brings us to this year, 2025. We are actually speaking in between two trips that I'm doing. I just got back from walking with this group called the Migrant Trail. So every May, they organize a week-long walk that starts at the U.S.-Mexico border, or sometimes just across the border. But this year, we did not cross for fear of not everyone getting back across into the U.S. again. But they walk from the border to Tucson, Arizona. And the purpose of that walk is really powerful. The purpose of it is to bear witness to migrant deaths that are happening in that area of the country. Like broadly across the border, but really particularly in that area, which is an area that a lot of migrants get funneled to as a result of the immigration policies that the U.S. has in place. So this one was really focused on how can walking and pilgrimage be a tool for remembrance, a tool for honoring those who have passed, for grappling with communal grief and thinking through what that looks like. How can we advocate for people who end up walking not as a choice? Like, the walking I do is as a pilgrim scholar is, I have a choice to like go and do this. It's all voluntary. And so what is the relationship between that kind of walking and then this other type of journeying that is really forced or maybe a last resort for people? And so, I mean, this group was incredible. I would walk with them again. It was amazing. During the walk, we carried crosses with the names of people who had passed away while making the migration journey. And, a lot of them are unknown. So the names would just say like unknown or desconocido in Spanish. It was really powerful just, to walk through this land where so many people have passed, and to just say like, hey, we see you, and there are people trying to do something about this. A lot of the people who walk at work really directly in, you know, in nonprofits or groups that work very directly with migration issues. Yeah, so to just walk through and say like, someone cares about this, and there are people trying to do work on this and trying to, you know, make things better or more humane. It was really powerful, and I think provided a lot of hope for me amidst situations that we're currently in that feel like there's not a lot of hope often. And it was fun. I mean, you know, we camped for a week. We had a camp talent show one night. Like, someone juggled in it. People read poetry. I mean, it was actually a lot of fun. In addition to the really serious element of it, yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And then, as I mentioned to you before, I'm going back to Europe this summer, and part of that will be working at a hostel along the Camino's northern route, and probably walking like a 1 or 2 week section of that. Probably not the entire thing. Yeah, so I mean, this, you know, what I thought was a one-off trip really was the catalyst for like kind of a new chapter in my life, which is this rhythm of doing these trips every summer.
I mean, that's exactly like why I wanted to pull you onto the podcast because, everyone I feel like has like that one trail when people who do this over and over that really spoke to them. Like me, it was hiking Colorado when I was a teenager. Um, but in the US of Camino. And I think my final question for you is, a lot of people's dreams to hike the Camino. It's a very well-known trail for a reason. So what advice would you give to people who are thinking about hiking it, who are thinking about doing the pilgrimage? What things did you learn on it that you would like to give to people listening to the podcast right now?
Biggest piece of advice is just go do it. You can do it. Like,
Yeah, I love it.
anyone can do it. Uh,
Yeah.
if you are traveling on a low budget, the Camino can work for you. There are really cheap hostels. If you have mobility issues, there are buses that go between towns. If you don't have time to do, the 6 week, 550-mile trek, do a portion of it. Pick a week. Um, do less miles in a day. Like, you can make it into something that works for you, and you will have an amazing time no matter what. Um, Other than that, I mean, kind of your common stuff, like pack really light. Your backpack is it's going to feel heavier than you thought it would. Um, be open to connecting with other people, but also know when you need some time for yourself. It can be a lot to live in hostels for that many weeks and be sharing rooms with that many people all the time. So, there was one night in the middle that I was awake at 2 a.m., unable to sleep because it was just so hot. I was walking during the Iberian Peninsula's worst wildfire season on record. So that was an interesting twist to my whole experience. But there was one night I just decided, I just need air conditioning tomorrow, and I will do anything for air conditioning. And at 2 a.m. from my bunk bed, I booked a hotel with a private room and bathroom in the next town, and I splurged on a hotel for a night. So I think it's just a lot about like checking in with yourself really regularly. Anyone can do the Camino. I really believe that. You just have to be really tuned into yourself and what do you need? When do I need to push myself versus when do I need to slow down? Those types of things. But it is amazing. And for me, it was life-changing. That sounds cliche, but it really was. So, I'm so excited that you're doing this series too of hikes that have impacted people or changed people's lives. And, maybe like for some people, it wouldn't be life-changing. Maybe for some people it would. It would be a great experience no matter what. And you will just meet a lot of people at kind of transition phases in their life, like I was, or marking big moments, right? Like retirement or things, or dealing with like more serious things in their life that they're like, yeah, I don't know what to do with this. I need to go like hike and think through some things. Um, so it's just a space that can just hold a lot. And you can really do it in the way that works for you. So I would just say, just go do it.
Well, I love that. Sadie, thank you so much for joining us on the Long Ways podcast. Once again, I'm Devin Whittlespecht. And Sadie, thank you. And this is the Long Ways podcast. So thank
Thank
you
you so
for
much.
listening.